Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're taking a look at a very, very rare bayonet. This is allegedly an Australian KCB-77 M1/KH bayonet. I can't confirm this one is Australian because they're completely unmarked, sadly, which is the same as those issued to many other countries, for example, Ireland. Spain also uses the same model of bayonet, but theirs are made domestically and have markings on them. Whether this is completely sterile, which is consistent with the Australian ones, but I think it's also consistent with a couple other countries as well. So I can't 100% confirm this is Australian, but that's what I believe it to be. Anyway, these were adopted for the F88 steyr rifle. So they were adopted in the late 1980s, and they were only in service for a couple of years before they were replaced in 1991 by the M7 and M9 bayonets. M7 for training, I believe, and M9 was operational. So in the early 1980s, Australia was looking at replacing their aging SLR rifles, which were in 7.62 NATO, and they wanted to replace them with a rifle in 5.56mm with a 1:7 twist ratio barrel. And really, they were only looking at two contenders. They were looking at the Colt M16 and the steyr AUG. So the Australian Engineering Development Establishment conducted the engineering evaluation of the individual weapon for the Small Arms Replacement Project. That is a mouthful, but that's what they called it. And that was conducted in 1984 and 1985 at the Lone Pine Barracks in Singleton, Australia, which is also the School of Infantry. Essentially, the first trial, or the first engineering aspect of it, consisted of 5 of each rifle, and they were torture tested and endurance tested. The steyr passed every test. The Colt failed a couple, so it was decided that the steyr was more favourable and went into production at Lithgow. So Lithgow produced 500 rifles, and they went into troop trials. So the troop trials were, I've asked a whole bunch of veterans and ex-servicemen, and it sounds like it was both 6 RAR and 8-9 RAR that conducted the tests, but it could have been others as well, but at a minimum then. And when they had these rifles, they came in a whole bunch of different configurations to see what the soldiers preferred. They also came with a couple of different bayonets. So this is one version we have here, and on top of that, we also had the L1A2, which was already in service with the SLR. So as you can see, this has a very small muzzle ring. That was modified up to 22mm, so it would fit, and a small number of those were made also in conjunction with these to test with these new rifles. I believe they ended up leaning towards this one here. They got 500 of them in total, from what I can tell, reading a couple of Ian Skedson books, but I'm not 100% certain of that information because I've already managed to disprove a little bit of info I've come across. From what I can tell, the KCB-77 M1KH was formally adopted in 1988 alongside the steyr AUG as the F88 steyr rifle. They were issued to battalions, again, very, very briefly, and within battalions, they were found to be lacking. So, while the KCB-77 is, in my opinion, a fantastic blade, very, very durable, very strong, it was found to rust, and it was found the tip snapped off. So, a lot of complaints were that they were not very durable and they broke. To top that off, a lot of the soldiers didn't like the square handle, and quite a few of them got in trouble for filing down the squared off edges. So, in 1991, the KCB was formally replaced by the M7 for training purposes and the M9 for operational reasons. During its brief number of years in service, Australia did have some brief service over in Somalia. I don't know if they deployed with these bayonets or not. I've scoured all the photos I can. I've spoken to a couple of people and no one really remembers, and you can't see these bayonets in any of the photos at all. So that's really the history of this bayonet. It was only in service for, well, it was a trials bayonet for a couple of years, and then it was in service for about 3 years, and then they were just absolutely trashed. I believe they were destroyed in the end, so not many of them survive. A couple tend to pop up from overseas because, as I said, this is a product that was also sold to other countries, so it's very difficult to tell the difference between an Australian and another one. And it's believed they're made by Karl Icon in Germany, because it's the style of bayonet that they make. They make the KCBs. However, they had already splintered into a couple of different companies by that stage, and I don't know which specific company made them, but it would have been a company within Germany. Now I'll jump into the construction of the bayonet here. So, as you can see, we have a nice flat unfullered blade with a really pointy bowie tip there. The false edge is unsharpened, and a primary complaint was that the bowie tip from about here forward was prone to snapping. Plus, soldiers are also prone to use these to get leverage to pry things, and on top of snapping the tip, they're also damaging the blade itself. Then we have a sharpened true edge, and just like the AK bayonets, we have a wire cutter. Then we also have a very long sawback on the back of the blade, and then moving down, we've got our crossguard. And our crossguard has a bottle opener on one end, and then a nice big 22mm Stanag muzzle device, muzzle ring on the other. We've got polymer grips, which have this funky little proprietary screw device for removing the screw and taking the handle off. And then we just have a very blocky looking standard NATO bayonet lug attachment device. Same as what you find on the M7s. What makes these cool is when you move down to the scabbard. So most of the KCB 77s have, now I've got one here actually, bear with me, a scabbard and a frog that are riveted together and are removable. Whether, as you can see, the KH models are removable. So my understanding of KCB-77s is the standard military model is the M1, and that has a frog that cannot be removed from the scabbard, whether the KH has this addition. I should also point out that when these were initially adopted for trials, the first batch were commercial versions and they were in black. And they didn't have like this raised end, they just had the standard flat scabbard, and they had a bump about here that would prevent your fingers from moving down towards the wire cutter when using it as a wire cutter. Looking at the scabbard, it's pretty simple, just plastic, and then we've got a little wire cutter attachment at the bottom. So as I said, there are two different variations for the base of these. So one has sort of this raised diamond piece down the bottom, and the other doesn't. It has the raised horizontal piece. But yeah, as you can see, absolutely no markings on this anywhere at all. And of course we have our wire hanger attachment device. After filming this segment, I actually found a small stamp underneath the wire cutter that I've been told is a date code for manufacture. So if you know how to read this, I don't, you can figure out when they were actually made. The only markings I've ever come across on these is another fellow online has posted some photos of his, and on the back of the frog it has a bunch of markings in Sharpie, and I find that very credible because that's absolutely the kind of thing that the Defence Force does. I spent 15 years in the Australian Army myself, so it had a number, a broad arrow, and some other information on it that was pretty hard to make out because it was a bit faded. So I think that's very credible, and if you find one of these with those markings, I dare say that is probably going to be the real deal. I can't substantiate if this one was used by Australia or not. As I said, they are absolutely identical, and other than some Sharpie marks to the back of the frog, there is no way to tell. I do suspect that this is probably one that came from somewhere else though. Anyway guys, that's all I've really been able to dig up on these bayonets. They are absolutely awesome. This one was loaned to me briefly by a subscriber to the channel for the purpose of this video, so it's very generous to him, and thanks very much for letting me take a look at it. But very, very nice bayonet. I love the KCB-77, I always have. One of my personal favourites is my KCB long, even though it's the CS fighting knife version, not the bayonet. But yeah, very, very cool piece, and thanks for letting me film it. Anyway, guys, if you have any other information, please feel free to comment below. The information I sourced for this video today, I got from a couple of books. So I've got Ian Skenson's Australian Military Rifles and Bayonets. This has 2 pages on it, which I found very useful. We've got this page here, which is just very brief outlines to what it is. And then it's got a dedicated bayonet page back here on page 105, which had some pretty good information, although they called it the KFS 77. KFS is an abbreviation for knife, fork, spoon. So I think that's a bit of a typo. And the other book I found pretty useful was British and Commonwealth Bayonets, again by Ian Skenson and Robert Richardson. Neither book had a terrible lot of information. This one was published in 84, this one was published in 88, and it had a little bit more information than the other one did. I also managed to read the unclassified trials documentation, but that only had engineering data about the rifles and essentially the torture tests they put through them. There wasn't a terrible lot there. And finally, I jumped online and actually had a chat to some of the guys who contributed to the trials. So guys who had just marched out of the School of Infantry and were given rifles and asked for their feedback when they shot them. But I couldn't track down anyone who knew the outcomes of the trials, or anyone who actually ran the trials, just guys who participated. I tried speaking to a couple of different agencies and no one really wanted to talk to me because I'm just some dude on YouTube. Like I tried talking to the Australian War Memorial, the Infantry Museum up at Lone Pine Barracks, and the Lithgow Small Arms Factory Museum, and even Talis Group here in Australia as well, but they didn't want to talk to me either. I sent them an email and never got a reply back. But that's all I've got on this bayonet here. Very, very cool piece. Very, very jealous. Unfortunately, they do sell for quite a lot when you see them. And again, if you do come across one online, try to be a bit skeptical because there is no real way to tell if it's genuine Australian other than the markings on the back of the frog. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you today. Please comment below if you have any more information, and thanks for watching.